Okay, so welcome to part 8 of the Endless To Do app. So today we're gonna mainly focus on animation, and there's a couple of things I want to go over. So first, some general animation principles, whether it's web animation or 2D animation or 3D animation, doesn't really matter. Some key concepts or principles that are important to make like an natural feeling, satisfying animation is the concept of easing. And you can think of it as like driving a car. Like you don't start at the top speed and you don't suddenly end at 0. You slowly accelerate and decelerate. And that's also what we're going to do with our animations, and that concept is called easing. So you start slow, you build up, and then you slow down again at the end. Another concept in animation that's often used is overshooting, which means you go beyond the target that you want, and then you go back, and it has a sort of a springy or bouncy effect. And we'll get clear once we implement it. So that's like the general animation side. And then there's a couple of techniques that we can use to create animations. So you can use transitions, CSS transitions. You can use keyframe animations in CSS. JavaScript also has an animate option, which is very similar to keyframes, but in JavaScript instead of CSS. And then specifically for SVGs, there's some cool stuff you can do with the path. So you can use this path and make stuff following it along. And there's also a technique where you use the stroke width to give the impression that the path gets drawn. That's also maybe a bit abstract, but you'll see once we get there. So first we have our checkbox, but right now it doesn't have a toggle function, so it's always on. So let's first write some code to fix that. So what we do is we take our wrapper, we add a event listener for the click event, and we simply toggle a class checkbox wrapper dot class lists. So class lists is I'm not sure if it's, I think it's like that. Might be with a lowercase l, we'll see in a minute. So class list is the collection of the classes that are on the wrapper, and it has some interesting functions like toggle function. So we'll add a checked class if it's not present in the class list, or we remove it if it is, and this will turn or toggle our check mark on or off. So let's start with that, and then we can inspect this so we can see if it works or not. So now you can see once we click it, the to-do gets the checked class, which is great because now we can do something with that. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to, actually I'm going to define a color for our check mark here. It will help us to, in a later stage, easily control the color of the check mark. So for now, we'll fall back to the primary color, and we'll use this new variable. But first, if our check mark is not checked, let's just use a transparent stroke. And when we have the check mark class, the checked class on our check mark, we will set our SVG stroke color. So stroke, there we go. So let's test that out. And we did something wrong. I'm not entirely sure what we did wrong. The ET check mark. Did I make a mistake? I don't think so. So the SVG. I made a little typo here. So that explains why it was not working. So now we can actually check this on or off. Now we do not have our animations yet, but not to worry, we'll get to that. So we'll start off with a nice animation for our check mark by adding some keyframe animation. So let's start with a bounce effect. And there's different ways to add keyframes. You can use from and to if you just need 2 steps, but you can also add specific percentages. Those are like stages of the animation. So in this case, I'm going to use 4. And let's animate our scale in the keyframes. Now we're going to see the concept of overshooting. Something like that. So our animation starts at scale 1, and then we go to scale 1.3, and then we go, so that's a bit larger than our initial scale, and then we want to go back to our 1, but that's the overshooting part, so we go a little bit lower, and that will give us a sort of springy effect. And we'll see that as soon as we implement it in our checked animation. So we use animation keyword, we use the name of our animation, which is bounce check mark. We give it a timing, let's say 400 milliseconds, and then we use an easing function. So in this case, we'll use ease in out, and we tell our animation that it should end up in the animation in the last step. So it will stay in the state wherever it was on 100%. In this case, it's not really important because we end and we start with the same state. So, but I will just put it here anyway. So let's test it out. So now you can see that we have this nice bouncy effect. Now, if we wouldn't do the bouncy effect, let me just quickly make an example that doesn't have that. I'll call it simple, and I will just do this. So we will not overshoot, and we will also, I'll just copy this for now. We'll lose the easing function after, just to see the difference in feel of the animation. So you can see that now it doesn't feel quite as nice and springy. It feels less natural. Now if we move the easing function, it will look really unnatural and even boring, I might say. So this has a really flat feel to it. So you can really see the difference it makes when you just use some animation principles like overshooting and easing. It makes your animation a lot more satisfying. So the next part is, well, it's cool that it has this nice bouncy effect, but what I would like to do is that the check mark gets like we have this effect like it gets drawn on the screen. And for that, we can use the stroke dash array and the stroke dash offset. So to explain this, let's start with our, gonna make a variable here for our dash array, and we'll just start at 1. And we'll just say stroke dash array is equal to our variable of dash array. So let's see what that looks like. So it's not yet clear, but it will become clear in a moment. We up this. Now you can see this controls the size. If you use like a striped stroke, it controls the stripe, the size of the stroke. Now what is interesting is that you can see that we already get this drawing effect. So we have to guess the exact size that we need. So it might be around 20, I think. And we need it in 2 directions. So let's test this again. Okay, so what happens now? So we can already have kind of this effect. Now the next thing that we can do is we can control where our stripes start, and this, if we make the spacing of between 2 stripes exactly the length of our path, then we can move our stripe along our path and it will give the impression of being drawn. So we'll give it a stroke dash array of 20 and a stroke offset of the size of our dash array. Actually, we'll just do it like this. It's not stroke offset, is stroke dash offset. Okay, so let's see. Now I clicked it and we don't see anything. But now this is the magic. If we animate the stroke dash offsets, you can now see that we can fake this movement. And to understand more what happens, we'll just halve this value. And then you can see what actually happens. You can see we just move our stripes over our shape, but because the gap is exactly the length of our path, we only get 1 stripe, which gives the illusion of the stripe or check mark being drawn. So what we can do is we start at 20 and recreate an animation. Create it here. That animates it. So we'll call this draw check mark, and we just need 2 values, and we animate our stroke dash offset from 20 to 0. And now we can animate this. So here we have our animation when it's checked, and we'll just add a comma, because this way we can add multiple animations. So we do the draw check mark, also 400 milliseconds, the same easing function, and we end with forwards. And let's see what this gives us. And now we have this nice animation of our check mark being drawn. Now, one thing I would like to do is I don't want the animations to play together. I want them to play one by one. So it's more clear what's happening. So let's just delay this animation by 400 milliseconds. By the way, these are all shorthands for different properties, but if you want to see what they actually look like, we can inspect them to see exactly what they do. So if we open this, you can see the animation duration, the timing functions, the delays, and so forth. You can see what all those values stand for. So now when we check this, we first get our draw effect and then our bounce effect. For the next part, we'll animate a little circle that follows this path using a JavaScript animation, but we'll keep that for the next episode.